I don't really want to do this because when you're evaluating yourself, you're faced with the fact that you are a flawed person. And the waters that I swim in are occupied by hooligan criminals who angle at any legitimate flaw to exploit it as some sort of tragic flaw. And it gets excessive and abusive. And I remind you that Seattle lured me here with a promise for protection from abuse, which they admit I need, but then subverted with the claim I didn't deserve. They've tortured me. So the animosity valve is on full blast. And that's not what I want to deal with. But there is something to be said for self-reflection. And it seems to me that a lot of stuff is going on in the public domain, which has been taken over by the internet, the so-called algorithms of availability and access. I mean, there are people out there we can't find who we would probably be wise to know, wiser if we knew. And it falls under sort of a caption device about narratives. I don't really buy into it. I know it's the new way, but I don't really buy into it. And the reason I don't really buy into it is because I know the difference between convenient monologues, diatribes of acceptability and learning things, grappling with the unknown, seeking things out, doing research and reading. And there's a gap in sensibility and understanding that exists between this idea of a narrative, which is just a feed source, and actual appreciation. And you see it in the situation with me, which is that the narrative says, I don't appreciate now. And that's the feed. And they wouldn't let me go to school. They wouldn't, I mean, when I did my homework and turned in my class papers, I got comments like, your admiration for Fannie Lou Hamer is obvious. And it doesn't, no matter how you connive it, it doesn't congruent with Seattle's narrative to look at the record of academics and time consumed with knowledge searching, work, and appreciation. It was, a lot of it was done in my own time when I wasn't allowed to go to school. And so I did it in my free time. It was leisure reading. And it's a dead end because the narrative comes from the new Black legacy estate. And it's just a foot stomping on somebody's head who was deafened and tortured as a child, saying, you aren't special. You don't deserve special notice. We're not going to read. You can't go to school. And calling it progressive stand. Now, if you look down the street, people don't know how to read the international bulletins very clearly. You have an Israeli saying Hamas is not the enemy, the people of Palestine are. You're supposed to go, oh my goodness, we didn't get across to anybody after 2 years of this that they're trying to commit a macabre elimination of the Arabs in the Gaza Strip. That didn't get across. When the message is Hamas is not the enemy. Hamas, they have a story that sort of coagulates with the daily bulletins of Zionist creepers going out and finding the quarrymen of Gaza who are in Hamas, bribing them to make gangs, good fellas of Hamas, cultivating the good fellas the way they used to in Pittsburgh. The Zionists used to bribe, muscle to kidnap little boys. And they can't put together that Hamas was the good fellas, that Israel got to pull this stunt. If you look down straight here, we have this cosmonaut thing at the supernova, and the rave was part of the project. And I've been online for years explaining the work I did when I was stationed as a medical library clerk in 1984, looking at stupid people who read people like Neil Postman, who can't see the pun, and kneel before the postman. And the slip in the tape where he says 1984 wasn't about 1984, it was about Brave New World, because he leaves out that it was about 1984. That was when the AIDS attack started to be negotiated by those who kneeled before the British postman. And the British exploited the situation. They created this situation in order to exploit the situation. They turned it into a myth of their power. Who mourns for Ringo? Who mourns for Adonis? And it was absurd theater, but it got guerrilla theater going. If you look down here at the supernova, it's overseen by the cosmonaut. If you look at the Tacoma library book I brought home, the card shows that the Russians in the bank made 50-50 shake on the Texas school book. DD, like Diamond Dogs. It ain't rock and roll, it's genocide. They're bragging about it. They brag about it. So what's going on? What's going on is idolatry of ostentation. The narratives are full of ostentation. Some of them are very legitimate discourses about preservation of archives. But misinterpretation, refusal to properly accredit, erasing evidence is not a legitimate discourse. If you look at the Smithsonian's role in what went on with me, they're supposed to be glorified for preserving attributes of folk art. What did they actually do when they caught John Schulman? They covered up the fact that his colleagues also worked for Donald Trump. There was a guy named Don Wentworth. Where it went and what was it worth, Don? The Smithsonian stood there more or less without a peep when Cyril Wecht Shulmaned Kennedy's brain and let the lunch counters of the North Carolina sit-in be taken out. It was reported. I don't know if it's been reconfigured, but it was reported. So what is the persona that Greg Carl talked about and sold with the help of the Green Party? What is this persona? The persona is subjected to successive degradations of the X motive. You get the Cookie Monster. What's that mean? What's that mean? Sex. 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 The poor little lost boy had gotten seduced by somebody. In the age of Love American Style, what gives? They have two versions, Pussy Ball clocked to the AIDS attack. As a point of fact, and it becomes this oligarchy's ostentatious master secret narrative. And the Black Pilgrimage becomes a storyline of some trashy pimps in Pittsburgh who pulled in a call girl to make an object for the military, Green Germans and Russia, in the Texas school book that Hamas, Nosferatu, Putin, Willie Wadmaker, and Donald Toon all subscribed to. Hillary Clinton was the scientist who went after the neuroplasm and overdubbed the plunger of an innocent virgin who she hired to plunge the neuroplasm to get the tea kettle to go off. The Clintons knew that Jimmy Carrey had been poisoned and tortured and deafened and gassed and gaslit and abused, and they sent in a mafia hooker from Oxford for Martin Scorsese to get a whoop show going. And here comes Obama, the dapper dude. He's not going to let queerball get out of the black ostentatious narrative. These weren't black pimps. These were sacred crusaders. Sacred crusaders.